Most people have many misconceptions when it comes to injury preventative piano technique. It's one of those ideas that's really not taken that seriously. But in this video, you're going to learn the truth about the 5 most common misconceptions about injury preventative piano technique. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So when it comes to injury preventative piano technique, I find that I'm constantly explaining these ideas and straightening out different misconceptions, as most people don't really know much about it. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first misconception is that injury preventative piano technique is only for people who have injuries. Now, this is probably the most common misconception, but in all fairness, this is certainly largely to do with the misleading title. Because it's referred to as injury preventative technique, we tend to think that it is for people who have, well, injuries. Logical, right? But the fact of the matter is that injury preventative piano technique goes far deeper than this. Injury preventative piano technique is more of a means of analyzing and applying the absolutely most efficient and coordinated way of playing the piano. The end goal of this is to make piano playing as easy and effortless as possible, as well as avoiding injury. Many pianists execute simple motions in the hand and arm thousands of times daily when they practice. And when these motions are executed in an awkward, tense way, the results can be very injurious. That's why it's so important to make sure that all the motions we make at the keyboard are as efficient as possible. Most people also don't know that over 50% of serious pianists have suffered from an injury at some point in their career. This fact makes injury preventative piano technique all the more necessary for the vast majority of pianists to understand and study. The second misconception is that injury preventative technique is only for avoiding injury. Now, obviously, this misconception is very closely related to the first one, but it is somewhat different in that it has a different nuance. The assumption here is that you should only study injury preventative technique if you're worried about acquiring an injury. But in fact, there have been many pianists who have studied with teachers that could teach them about injury preventative technique, not because they themselves had injuries, but because they were curious what it was all about. What many of these pianists found is that they gained efficiency and ease of playing that they had previously not experienced. The point here is that injury preventative technique is for anyone who wants to unlock any boundaries that they have had in their technique. Again, what many pianists have found is that when they studied these concepts, they were able to play repertoire with far less fatigue and discomfort. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing so you don't miss any future uploads. The third misconception is that only certain people need injury preventative technique because their bodies aren't built for the strain of playing the piano traditionally. This misconception is more challenging to explain because different people have differences in their body, to a degree. We all have bodies that essentially work the same way. Anatomically, we're essentially the same. Our arms and hands and fingers work the same way. But there are some differences. Why is this? I think the best way to explain this is that some people naturally play better with better technique, whereas other people don't. This explains why some pianists are amazing and absolutely brilliant, while other pianists who study with the same teachers are not the same level of artists. Another aspect of this is that some people's bodies are better at withstanding injury than others. For instance, I developed an injury when I was younger, much earlier than another pianist who studied with the same teacher. Although we both eventually developed injuries, she developed an injury much later than me because her body was better at withstanding the vast amounts of tension. Okay, now the fourth misconception is that if you play extremely well, then you don't need to worry about getting injured. There's actually a certain amount of truth to this misconception. Generally, if a pianist plays extremely well, it typically means that their technique is very efficient and the chances of them developing an injury can be quite low. I mean, if their technique wasn't pretty efficient, they wouldn't be able to play as well as they do, right? It's sort of the idea that if you play really well, it proves that you know what you're doing. But this is not necessarily always the case. For instance, Rachmaninoff referred to his up-and-coming concert seasons as his, quote, season of pain, end quote. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Rachmaninoff had an injury, but it does tend to imply that he experienced a lot of tension and discomfort as a result of practicing and playing 40 hours a day. But I have more examples. Leon Fleischer is a very famous example of a pianist and teacher who has struggled with injury practically his entire career. In fact, for much of his career as a teacher, he would only play and demonstrate for his students with his left hand because his right hand was so injured. Another example is the very famous Canadian pianist Glenn Gould. He struggled with back and spinal injuries because of sitting far too low at the keyboard, as well as injuries in his hand and arms. Despite the fact that these pianists played extremely well, they still developed injuries. This proves that beyond a shadow of a doubt that just because someone plays extremely well does not necessarily mean that they have good technique and won't develop an injury. Alright, so now the fifth and final misconception is that if you're really serious about playing the piano, then injury preventative technique is not really for you, because it can't truly meet the demands of virtuosic repertoire. Now, a simple YouTube search of Dorothy Taubman will instantly prove this misconception false. The same Dorothy Taubman, who founded the Taubman approach to piano technique and the Taubman Institute, which later became the Golansky Institute. She worked with thousands of pianists, many of which were very famous world-class musicians, and helped them to overcome injuries as well as fix their technique so that they could meet the demands of the repertoire that they were failing to meet themselves. No, injury preventative piano technique is a technical approach that is not just designed to avoid injury, but is also the most efficient, coordinated approach to the piano that makes playing the most advanced, difficult repertoire easy and effortless. Sounds ridiculous? Then you probably have never experienced this, and I would encourage you to look more into it. It is true that many of these misconceptions are born out of this perhaps poorly termed technical approach. In fact, many teachers that first developed these ideas did so simply to help their students progress, and it wasn't until later that they applied them to helping students avoid injury. Nonetheless, these concepts and ideas are absolutely essential for both injured and healthy pianists. Alright guys, so that's it for this one. I hope you found this information thought-provoking and interesting. And don't forget to let me know in the comments down below what experience you have had with these kinds of technical ideas. Also, if you have any requests for future videos, put those in the comments down below as well. And if you haven't done so already, make sure and subscribe so you don't miss any future content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
Ich scroll nicht, ich scroll.